Late in December, the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth Material Ultimania finally released, including all sorts of new developer comments and never-before-seen key art. If you know me and the Under the Plate series, of course I spent some time looking through this and talking with our on-team translator about what some of the comments said. Although the information in this Material Ultimania is far fewer than what we got in the Rebirth Ultimania, there's still some interesting comments here and there that I thought might be interesting to the community. So, today's Under the Plate episode is going to be a little different, but I like to experiment and we're going to try something new. Final Weapon has translated 20 of the most interesting comments from this Material Ultimania, and today we're going to go through each one of them, kind of discussing what they said and what we could take away from it. Granted, don't expect anything too big on what's happening in part 3, what's going on here, what's going on there, but there's a lot of fun nods here and there that I think a lot of people will find interesting if you're like myself. With that being said, welcome back to Under the Plate, and let's dive into this special episode discussing the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth Material Ultimania. Alright, let's kick this off with staff comment number 1 from lead pre-visualization artist Shuzo Tadokoro. The original plan for the opening cutscene was to simply depict a destroyed Midgar, but we were at a loss on how to add a digestible scene that summarized the latter half of Final Fantasy VII Remake. However, it turned out to be a very impressive opening cinematic with battles, disasters, and handsome men, if I do say so myself. I personally think that opening cutscene is so perfect because I didn't expect it at all. I was taken aback when Cloud shot out of the Shinra HQ and the glass shattered with the Hardy Daytona, realizing that, oh wait, this was the end of FF7 Remake. And then, talking on the destroyed scenes of Midgar, I thought immediately to the teases we saw at, Summer Game Fest, where we saw Red 13, Tifa, Aerith, and Barret all just assumedly dead, and it's still, what a crazy scene that is. So really, I think the team did such a good job with the opening cutscene, setting up a really interesting and suspenseful opening for the game. And gosh, I can't end without talking about that title drop, using that iconic music from the opening of Final Fantasy VII and leading in with that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth title card in a world we're not exactly sure of. Switching gears to our second comment, we've got a quote here from the Rebirth's lead character modeling artist. During Final Fantasy VII Remake's development, Tifa's socks were shorter and her tank top was white, which is identical to her original model. At some point, once we had an overall basis, we discussed with Nomura-san, and he came up with the idea of adding a black innerwear and longer black socks. I think the color balance between black and white came out really well. So obviously here, just a quick comment about Tifa's overall design and how that evolved from the beginning of Final Fantasy VII Remake's development. Personally, I love her design and still think it's even better than the original game, though I'm sure plenty of people disagree with me. For our third staff comment from animation artist Hikaru Murakami, we've got a fun one here about Zack. I imagined a strong and dependable Zack, like he's saying, I'll take care of it. Personally, he is my favorite male character in Final Fantasy VII, but just before his full body CG was completed, it was pointed out that the direction of the Buster Sword on his back was wrong, the opposite of Cloud's, and I rushed to correct it. I guess I have no right to say I like him. While this is just a fun nod from one of the animation artists commenting on a mistake, it's worth pointing out just how interesting it is that both Zack and Cloud have the Buster Sword positioned in different ways on their back. Whenever I think about this, my mind always goes to that scene in Final Fantasy VII Remake where we first see Zack and that foot steps up overlooking Midgar and you see where the Buster Sword is. Square Enix almost evilly teased this in the final trailer for Final Fantasy VII Remake, and so many, including myself, were just astonished and taken aback that potentially Zack was being teased to be in this game. For our fourth comment, we've got another quote from Hikaru Murakami. I had previously created a younger version of Glenn during the development of Final Fantasy VII First Soldier, and at that time I was thinking he might appear in the remake project later. I was trying to figure out how to change his appearance to one that looked younger while keeping the storyline setting in mind. I am looking forward to seeing how he will be involved in the story. When Glenn was first teased in that September trailer for Rebirth, my mind immediately went to him even though it wasn't confirmed or denied that it was Glenn. The First Soldier is such an interesting story, and if you haven't hopped on and started it yet, I highly recommend downloading Ever Crisis or just watching the cutscenes on YouTube. Glenn's definitely going to have a role in Part 3, even if it's just being a puppet. Next up, we have a staff comment from Creative Division designer Roberto Ferrari, who has created many of the character designs we've seen in the Final Fantasy VII Remake project. I had a hard time getting the okay on Tifa's swimsuit, even though I've made a number of suggestions. Since the game allows the player to see the character from various angles, it was necessary to keep her feminine form from being overemphasized, and we eventually settled on this design. While some people will certainly find this quote humorous, I think it's actually interesting to think about the process that Ferrari likely has to go through with Nomura. He explicitly states here that he had a hard time getting the okay on her design, and it's likely he has to get the okay on every design he creates for the remake project. Just how many variations were there? For comment 6, we have another quote here from Roberto Ferrari. Rosa's crown from the Loveless play is inspired by the Statue of Liberty and the hands of a clock in New York City. The design of the costume's cane also incorporates elements such as feathers and gears. We're assuming that this clock he's referring to is the famous one in New York Central Station. It's pretty interesting how New York was even incorporated into this very critical element of the Loveless play. And you can see that how he mentions the cane and the gears and the feathers and how that was also used as backdrops in the play as well. For comment 7, here's a fun bit of trivia from animation artist Tetsuya Kudo. During Rebirth's development, we had a rule where each character's full-body CG had to be holding their respective weapon. However, as you all know, Sephiroth's beloved Masamune is rather long, so it was difficult to balance it to fit inside the picture, and we struggled to find the right pose. In the end, I am glad it turned out well. To me, this is honestly something that just really highlights the difference between the models and character art used for Remake versus Rebirth. In Remake, all of the characters were kind of just standing there in poses, but Rebirth, they all have their weapons like they're ready to fight. It's a fun nod that almost acts as the turning of a page to this next chapter of the trilogy. Comment 8 focuses in on Yuffie. For Yuffie's model in Rebirth, Nomura asked us to add more Eastern elements to her costumes, so we made some design changes from her model in Intergrade. Specifically, we added details like armor sleeves to the left arm and a belt and pouch to her pants. The front of her pouch has also been designed to hold several kunai, which are essential for a ninja. Her shoes have also been slightly redesigned, although it is difficult to tell. Yuffie's model changes was one of the first things I noticed when the new character CGs got released, and quite honestly, I think they really improved her design. Sure, her design in Intergrade was great, but these new changes they made, I feel like made Yuffie a lot better and almost incorporated more elements of what I'd expect of someone from Wutai. Comment number 9 looks at Cait Sith. Cait Sith's model was created during development of Final Fantasy VII Remake, despite him only making a full-fledged appearance in Rebirth. The final adjustment phase of his fur when creating the full-body CG was quite challenging, but I think his soft texture was expressed beautifully. This is a fun nod of trivia to when Cait Sith appeared as the plate fell in Final Fantasy VII Remake. And I'll definitely have to agree here about his texture looking soft. The development team did such a good job of creating those textures for Fat Moogle and Cait Sith, as they really looked almost soft and fluffy inside the game itself. It's only right that we follow one Cait Sith comment with another, so here we're talking about Fat Moogle. We had already made a provisional model for Cait Sith's Moogle partner during the development of Remake, but at that time it was much slender and looked as if it would be easy for him to pass through narrow passageways. After consulting with Nomura, we changed the style to a much more rounded one. His color is easily affected by lighting, so we made adjustments to ensure that it would not be off when his CG was completed. Next up, we have comments from character artwork artist Asami Sugiyama and main character modeler Dai Suzuki. When I was drawing Rhonda at first, I thought, what a beautiful handsome man, but she is female. I guess you could say the design was cool rather than cute. Rhonda's character drawing gave the impression of youthfulness, so at first we created her 3D model in that direction. However, in response to a request from the scenario team, we added tanning and wrinkles to her skin to give the impression of someone who works hard. If you forget, Rhonda is the mayor and sheriff of Under Junon, and she's the person that first stops the party as they walk in, noting Aerith's bounty. She's also the character that sends you on the fan favorite Stamp quest, where the song that is probably still stuck in your head plays. For comment 12, we have a comment from Final Fantasy VII Rebirth's environmental art lead. In the early stages of Rebirth's development, we initially envisioned an action-packed scene in which Cloud and his friends are chased by Midgar Sormer instead of directly fighting him. If you played the original game, you'll know that the scene was still tweaked in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, with Sephiroth coming in to deal the final blow to the Serpent. But overall, I'm so glad we got this fight, because it's one of my favorites in the early part of the game. Comment 13 has a fun piece of trivia you might have missed if you weren't paying attention in Junon. Inside Junon's movie theater, you'll find a series of posters. The names depicted, Attack of the Weapon, Tango of Tears, and The Nightmare Begins, are directly taken from the soundtrack names of the original Final Fantasy VII. This is something I actually picked up on when I first approached Junon, as I've listened to the original Final Fantasy VII soundtrack by Nobuo Uematsu too many times to count at this point. These fun little nods that are littered throughout the world really give it new meaning and life, especially for people who played the original game. Discussing the Shinra 8, comment 14 has some interesting insight into the decision of the design. We've chosen to completely redesign the Shinra 8 from the ground up, so it looks very different when compared from the original Final Fantasy VII. We had a lot of fun coming up with this redesign, and I think it matches the Final Fantasy VII world much better. I certainly agree that I think it matches the world of FF7 so much better, especially with the new addition of Queen's Blood and having it be a tourist ship. Chapter 5 is one of my favorite parts of the game, especially because it's a bit of relaxation just after the crazy action in Chapter 4. But as we all know, the action only stopped for a brief moment, and even on the ship there were battles to be fought. Once again discussing the environment, comment 15 now focuses on Costa del Sol. In the original Final Fantasy VII, Costa del Sol was a cozy little town rich in nature, but also warm and inviting. For Rebirth, we decided to expand the size of the town, and it was a challenge to find a way to portray it without losing the atmosphere of the original game. I think we were able to successfully rearrange the town as a large-scale resort while retaining the original slanted orange roofs, landmark bridges, and other features that existed in the original version. Maybe it's just me, but Costa del Sol was by far one of my favorite locations in Rebirth. From Costa del Amor to gaining all the costumes for the different characters, and even seeing characters like Johnny again, I had such a blast in Costa del Sol, and still, when I open up Rebirth to just play a chapter or mess around in the world, I find myself revisiting to catch a glimpse of that resort life. Comment 16 comes from character artist Taiju Hayasaka. Aerith is the character with the largest number of costume variations in Rebirth, with about 20 if you include the variations such as the ones where she has her hair down or when she is dirty. Since there were many memorable scenes and facial enhancements, her hair expressions were also greatly improved in comparison to Remake. This is something I definitely noticed, and not just for Aerith, but all of the characters. It feels like the hair moved much more with the wind and felt more lifelike throughout Rebirth. This also goes for clothing in my opinion, as I feel like it took a huge leap in comparison to Remake. All of the different belts and stuff on the characters were moving with the wind much more and feeling more lifelike overall in Rebirth. Comment 17 comes from Creative Division designer Roberto Ferrari. When we created the costumes for Tifa, Aerith, and Yuffie that would be used for the Loveless play, we had no background or other character costumes in mind and were only given one key word: gears. Nomura also wanted a gothic image for the stage scene, so the skirt was designed to squeeze in just below the chest to emphasize the height characteristics of the architecture. Once again, this kind of goes along with Ferrari's earlier comments about the nature of the Loveless play. To me, it's really interesting that the key word the team had to go off of was gears. It was very prevalent through the play, and there's also other instances of gears throughout the game. Comment 18 comes from level designer Yuri Hiyoki. The tiger fangs are a spiky weapon, and there was an incident where on the gondola date cutscene, it got stuck in Cloud and we all looked at it and thought it would be painful for him. For Cloud's sake, we changed Tifa's weapon during the date to one that looks less painful. This is a pretty funny comment, but I just think it's interesting how intensely the team looks at small details like this. They're looking out for Cloud, for crying out loud. I do agree with their decision though, and I think they did it best just having Tifa's standard gloves be her weapon for the date. Comment 19 comes from lead level designer Yui Sawada, and we're focused on Tifa in the livestream sequence this time. During the cutscene where Tifa's memories surface in the livestream, you'll notice that Nibelheim appears a lot, but the truth is that there are also locations other than Nibelheim that appear. Now, what kind of other places does Tifa remember? I urge you to play the game yourself to find out. If you'll look really closely in these sequences, you'll actually see 7th Heaven and Stargazer Heights, which are both in Sector 7. In my opinion, obviously Tifa's ties to 7th Heaven don't need to be explained, but with Stargazer Heights, I think it's likely that that's thrown in because A, that's where she lives, and B, she shares memories with Cloud there. These are all just really fun teases and what's still my favorite part of the game. I just can't wait for part 3 to bring it all together. And finally, for comment 20, we have another comment from lead level designer Yui Sawada on Rebirth's final battle. Rebirth's final battle is characterized with its constant switching between parties and worlds. The sheer complexity of the battle made it difficult for development staff to know which world to switch and when. We ultimately had created a special document that detailed the flow of events and shared it with the team as we carefully implemented each section. From the scene where Zack fights in the church to the events that happen just prior to the battle as we repeatedly switch between Cloud's world and Zack's world, I was truly moved when we were able to make it work. In my honest opinion, Rebirth's final battle is truly one of the greatest things we've had in Final Fantasy. The stakes couldn't be higher after the events at the Forgotten Capital, and it's just made beautifully. I almost wish it went on for longer, but I know the developers are saving that for part 3. And truthfully, in my mind, the only thing that went through it that whole fight is what is fact and what is fiction. With that comment, we've officially gone through all 20 of our translations for the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth material Ultimania. Thank you so much for tuning in to episode 14 of our Final Fantasy VII series, Under the Plate. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit that subscribe button so you can help support us and make more episodes in the future. Also, be sure to leave a comment below and let us know what your favorite comment was in this video. We're looking forward to discussing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and beyond for years to come, and we're grateful for your support. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll catch you next time.